Hello, welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out in the direction of Novomikhailivka and Pobieda, where there are some small developments here. The Russians continue their offensive operations within the town of Novomikhailivka with no territorial changes, and the Ukrainians have started a counterattack in the direction of Pobieda, where they are trying to recapture the village. According to Deep State Map, the Ukrainians have reached the village itself. Considering the Russians have yet so far not managed to capture the fortifications around the village, it is likely that the Ukrainians still have positions here around it, which would allow them to quickly attack the village from their current positions. So as such, we see that there's continuous fighting between the two sides of the village of Pobieda despite the Russian capture of the village. So if the Russians are able to hold on to it, they will likely be able to develop their current position further. But if the Ukrainians manage to recapture it, then that would be an issue for the Russians developing the situation here. With that, we can see that significant fighting is taking place by Pobieda, and it is actually at a very decisive point right now, the fighting here within the southern parts of Marinka, as the developments by Pobieda would have a huge effect on developments in Novomikhailivka and subsequently Konstantinivka. So this section of the front line is currently being fought over in the battles of Pobieda and Novomikhailivka. Further north in the direction of Avdiivka, there has been significant developments. First off, the Russians managed to capture 6 square kilometers of fields before reaching the village of Sheverne and getting a foothold within it. As such, the Russians now have control over parts of Sheverne, and it is reported that the Ukrainians have been pushed out of the village. Some reports even saying that the Russians captured the village, but until it is confirmed, it will be as such, with the Russians having just a foothold within it. It was reported that the Russians launched an armored assault towards Sheverne from multiple directions, both from the south and from the north, both connecting to the eastern parts here of Sheverne. This is in combination with the fighting that is taking place in the north, both in Lastashkine and here to the east of Orelivka, where there has been another advance by the Russians as well. This was confirmed with geolocated footage, as well as the latest reports by Syriac maps and the Deep State map. And with this, we see that there is constant effort by the Russians, both with infantry assault groups and armored assaults, to gain a foothold within these villages and start the fighting there. Currently, the fighting is taking place within Lastashkine and Sheverne, where the Russians have a significant foothold within Sheverne, and they may capture the village very soon. The Ukrainians would be quick to give up the village of Sheverne, considering they have Tonenka right next to it, which is much better fortified and much larger than Sheverne. Sheverne is like the outpost that is connected to Tonenka, while Tonenka is the main defensive position. Yet again, more decisive battles taking place here in the central parts of Avdiivka to the west of the city, as we see the Russians pressuring on every single one of the Ukrainian fortified areas here to the west of Avdiivka, both Lastashkine, Orelivka, Sheverne and Tonenka. As such, the Russians have not stopped any of the offensive operations and instead are developing the situation further and are proceeding towards Sheverne, Tonenka, Lastashkine and Orelivka. With these developments, we see that the Russians are pressuring the Ukrainians very heavily, forcing them to use up their forces, forcing them to use up their artillery, and so on, so that they are able to grind down the Ukrainian forces faster and faster as time passes on, and that they get better positions and capture these villages while the Ukrainians are still weak. Moving further on to the northern direction, we see yet again the Russians storming yet another important village, this one Ivanivske, and yet another decisive battle, because the outcome of the Battle of Ivanivske could determine whether or not the Russians completely cut off the canal from the southern parts here, like Kleshivka and Drivka, and allow them to develop the situation towards Chasiv Yar. As such, Ivanivske is an extremely important village for the Ukrainians, significantly important, tactically, strategically important here in this section of the front line. And the Russians are storming it, gaining a foothold, capturing the trenches right next to it, and now the fighting is taking place within the village. We also saw this small advance here to the south of it, allowing them to then launch attacks towards the southern parts. So with this, we see that there are significant developments here in the direction of Ivanivske and a decisive battle taking place over the village here to the west of Bakhmut. The Russians have now started storming multiple villages across the front line, capturing Pobieda, and fighting continues over Novomikhailivka, Sheverne, Orelivka, Lastashkine, and Ivanivske all throughout the front line. And these battles are taking place very heavily, as well as in the north by Sinkivka in the direction of Kupiansk. So with this, we see that there's significant fighting taking place all throughout the front line, also throughout the south by Robotyne, where again the Russians managed to get a foothold, but then were pushed out. All of this naturally takes up a lot of forces on both sides. The Ukrainians are sending reinforcements to all the different areas. Whenever the Russians capture something, they send reinforcements to counterattack, like in Pobeda. And in the areas where the Russians are still fighting fighting continues, and the Ukrainians send reinforcements to hold these areas, whether it be Sheverne, Robotyne, Sinkivka, or Ivanivske. All of these areas will continue to receive reinforcements as the Ukrainians will try to hold on to all of their positions. The current situation is that the Ukrainian military is running short on pretty much everything. That is something that I've mentioned multiple times, both manpower, equipment, and most importantly, ammunition. There is this article by ABC that pretty much talks about the developments here in the direction of Ukraine. By spring, Ukraine faces a potentially catastrophic shortage of ammunition and air defenses that could effectively turn the tide of the war and lend Russian President Vladimir Putin a significant advantage, according to an internal US estimate. The way this works, ignoring all of their propaganda words like turning the tide when it's already in favor of the Russians, and it has been since the end of the Ukrainian summer offensive, and all the other parts, the main part is by the end of March. The way that rationing ammunition works is that, in essence, if the Ukrainians have 100,000 shells, hypothetically, that is enough for 2,000 a day, which they currently use, for 50 days. However, if they do not have any or do not receive any new shells, then in 50 days they'll run out if they continue at 2K a day. That means at the halfway point, whatever time frame they're using, at the halfway point, at 25 days left, they'll start using 1,000 a day to keep this rate going. Whether they do it by halfway marks or every day they decrease it by a little bit, in one way or another, the Ukrainians will start rationing the amount of artillery they use every day. Whether they completely stop in one section of the front line or simply decrease it in less active areas, what they need to do is that they need to ration so that they do not completely run out, to the point where they cannot launch a single shell in a whole day of fighting. At the same time, they mentioned the lack of air defense munitions, the lack of artillery munitions, lack of pretty much everything, and that is going to hit a pivotal point at the end of March, so in 1 month. So pretty much what we're seeing is that the Ukrainians are running low on ammunition, and their stockpile is running low, and the influx of ammunition is very low to pretty much a non-existent point. The European Union has failed to send as much as they promised, about half of what they promised, 500,000 a year, that's a little over 1,000 a day, which would be less than what the Ukrainians are using a day. Which means at some point at the current rate, the Ukrainians will simply run out of ammunition. The United States has so far yet to adopt a new aid package. The European Union is entering the final stage of adapting their own package, but the European Union package is unlike the US package. The European Union package will mainly be used to cut the budget deficit of the Ukrainian government, allowing them to pay wages, allowing them to keep the country running. Well, this means that most of it will not even go to the military. At the same time, it's about 60 billion euros over a 4 to 5 year period. That means about 12 billion euros a year, which is hardly enough for what Ukraine needs. At the same time, due to the intense requests of artillery shells, the European Union and the United States have not just gotten from their own storages, they have also taken from other storages. This has significantly increased the market value of artillery shells, spiking the price by 200 or 300%, somewhere in between those two. As such, the prices for artillery shells, as well as the production capacity, is low. This all adds up to whatever money they're receiving not being sufficient. The United States needs to send an aid package, or Ukraine would end up at a very significant issue, which consists of lack of ammunition. And that is not something that they can fix on their own or with the help of the European Union. This is something only the United States can do. And as such, the Ukrainians at this year, 2024, would be in a situation where they could lose the war completely in this year, simply due to the attrition being too much for them to handle, and the Russians simply overwhelming the Ukrainians because they themselves outproduce the whole European Union when it comes to artillery shells. And as such, the Russians are in a position right now where the fighting taking place all throughout the front line is extremely decisive. The faster the Ukrainians run out of ammunition, which consists of or is based on how much the Russians are attacking, which we are seeing that they are increasing their attacks and not stopping, not holding operational pauses. indicates that the Russians are aware of this problem and are currently working to pretty much grind down the Ukrainian artillery shells, grind down their military capabilities, and so on, as fast as possible and as much as possible to pretty much end the war quicker rather than later, to avoid the US sending additional aid, to avoid all of these things that add up to the Ukrainians continuing the war and the Russians just winning the war due to the lack of ammunition, lack of military equipment, and so on of the Ukrainians. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.